All right. I am here with Nicole Pollock, who is a contributor to the Helia Library. And today we're going to be talking about OKRs. So, Nicole, you wrote, you co-wrote with us the piece that we titled, Are You Actually Using Those OKRs? Because that is the number one thing I hear from folks about OKRs. It's like, oh, we set them in January and it's July and we haven't looked at them again. So I felt like it was a bit tongue in cheek, but is also the main problem I see. So before we actually get into OKRs, I wanted to start with your background because it totally surprised and delighted me. Because when we were first introduced, I'm not sure if it was you that said it or the person that introduced us, but your Six Sigma certification was mentioned. And I have to tell on myself that I didn't actually know that was a real thing. I thought that was made up on 30 Rock for like GE.
Well,
And so when I heard that, first of all, I was like, wow, Libby, read a book. And then I thought, oh, wow, this is a very traditional businesswoman I'm dealing with. And like, clearly she knows a lot, but we've come at this from different directions. Then you told me you started as a cartographer. And that surprised and delighted me because I don't know any cartographers. But also, it's not a traditional path I hear to the leadership roles of chief of staff, COO, president, CEO that you've found yourself in. And so I wanted to start there. That's my long preamble. Like, tell us a little bit about your background in cartography and how it sort of shaped the path for how you got to where you are today.
ooh, well, thanks for having me first. And I was super excited to write this article with you. Um, so I would say cartography was like a surprise to me too. I've always been very visual and I've always loved creating things. And I never really figured out a medium of like how to take that and combine it with the wonky data person that I also was. And when I was getting my degree in environmental studies, I was able to take several classes in GIS, which is an online mapping cartography uh, system. And I enjoyed kind of the wonk of it, but it really wasn't until I took a job right out of college as a consultant. And my job was to use that mapping software, use unique data sets, but also census data to begin to map public health disparities in my community. And we were doing it for mainly local nonprofits, the government. And it was all meant to help drive policy change. It was meant to be the justification or the background, or as you know, with good advocacy, you normally have the data and the stories. It was meant to be a complement to that narrative across several areas. And that that led me to be curious about policy, right? And so
Mm,
for me, it's all been a chain of curiosity and then trying to understand like where is the gap? Like what's not working and delivering in the system I'm being exposed to. So data, cartography, mapping helped tell a story that was very stark and clear to help a good public policy move. And then I moved into trying to do more of that. And then what did I see was you get a public policy passed, implementation chains aren't always there, right? To implement the intention that everyone had for this
mhm.
big victory. And so my interest then moved into governing, right? Which is to help think about that implementation chain. And then I started being involved in that implementation chain and saw great inefficiency and also just like great desire within all of the public servants I worked with, but just like a lot of barriers. And that's where the interest in becoming Six Sigma certified and engaging in kind of this concept called lean performance really took hold. Is that was a way to respond to that gap. So,
Mm.
and that's kind of how things have kind of evolved to where I am now. Is just that curiosity.
I love that. It's such an interesting path, and I think when I think about it makes me think about the opposite of burnout is curiosity, is what I've heard someone say recently, actually, is that you still have the energy and questions and drive to keep moving forward. And so that feels like, you know, whether you meant to be curious or not, I don't know, people just are naturally curious, but the most sustainable way to to move work forward is to have that curiosity.
Yeah, I also think of curiosity as just like the greatest privilege, right? I think um, maybe going back too far, when I was younger, I didn't see a lot of, when I saw adulthood, it looked really boring to me. And then I met some real curious adults. And I remember when I spent more time with these curious adults when I was in high school, they were some of my teachers. And I saw, oh, that's what cool adulthood looks like, right? Which is just like these people who are just curious. And so
Yeah.
they keep like peeling back the onion, and they don't just accept kind of
Mm.
like what they see around them as just how it is. And so I think of curiosity as just like the absolute greatest privilege of adulthood if you know how to take hold of it.
I love that. So we're going to have you do an article on curiosity because I'm already inspired.
Yes.
But back to OKRs, the
Yes.
topic at hand. So you took this curious path, and how did you end up being the person that leads OKRs where pretty much everywhere you go?
Yeah, so I would say it started when I became Chief Innovation Officer of the City of Providence. It was a new position. I'm sure some folks remember this, that title became very exciting kind of in the like 2010 to 2015 era. Sometimes it's still used, not always. And that was my first time of being responsible for it, for a large organization. So I was looking at systems throughout the city that maybe needed help and coming up with, well, what would it mean for it to actually move forward? Like what would that materially look like? So I developed out kind of a dashboard for the city, and then I became chief of staff of the city about a year and a half later. So then I'm in charge of the city, right? The budget, the departments. And so I had to figure out a simple way of bringing that concept into like a much bigger portfolio and be able to look at something every day that gave me like some nudges about where to focus, but also what
Mm.
questions to ask all of my team so that I was focused at the right level, but also like I was picking up on trends of where focus might need to be shifted or resources need to be shifted before something wasn't working or when something was working and it just needed more resource to be successful or scale.
Um, I love, okay, so that answer makes me think of like, what is the true use of OKRs? When OKRs are just something you're forced to set, it's not terribly inspiring for the people that are being forced to set them. But when you think of them, when you can turn them into this tool to say, are we working on the most important thing every day, day in and day out? And where are we against these goals? Like that becomes extremely helpful. Um, and this actually gets to something you talked about in the piece of being the chief cheerleader. It puts you in this cheerleader position versus compliance. Can you talk more about that?
Yeah. I think a huge piece of it too is being curious with your team about what you're measuring and why. So there's some obviously buy-in at the beginning of, okay, measuring this is actually interesting to the people who are involved in delivering on that particular OKR. But I think of OKRs as just an opportunity to know more about what your team is doing and then to be able to celebrate the good of it, right? So if you're in nonprofit space, you have certain OKRs relative to development and like different segments of development that you're engaged in, and you hit like a huge milestone and you're like exceeding your OKR goal, like that should be celebrated. That should be celebrated in your all staff. That should be celebrated in meetings you're having with the CEO. It should be celebrated within your team. And I just get jazzed when I watch like my team crush it, kill it, do a great job, gives me an opportunity to know that really concretely and just
Mm.
talk about it. We recently had one, we were working on a federal bill and we had a certain number of goals for signers, and one of my team members exceeded it by like 20%. And like super exciting. I wouldn't have been able to like give that quantitative, exciting update to everyone if I had not known it. So I think it's an important part of how you use them and should honestly be just as much of the purpose as kind of compliance or the quote unquote traditional performance,
Sure.
or it won't work.
So when you're in that cheerleader seat, that's when things are going right. We're in our best case scenario. What happens? What do you do? How do you handle it when folks aren't hitting their OKRs?
Yeah. I think that's when you want to be curious always, but that's a time to get extra curious. Normally, when something is not working, there's it's going to come through in something being slow or not coming through in the OKRs. And so that's where routines are really important. If you have OKRs and you don't have some regular meeting structure with your teams that lead on the OKRs, you aren't in dialogue with them in that way, you're never going to actually be able to have the conversation I'm suggesting that you have, which is like digging deep on what are the root causes, the root cause analysis of why something's not coming together. And so I would say, one, I get really curious, and two, I make sure that I use the routines we have to focus on those OKRs. So if one's not coming together, normally, like in a monthly OKR check-in, I'd pick like one that's going really well, one that's kind of on track, and then dig into one that maybe needs a little work. That being said, I do a little pre-work with the person who leads on that OKR to make sure that that conversation is constructive, and they feel like they understand like how what to dialogue around in terms of what might need changing.
Can you say more about what that pre-work might look like?
Yeah. So that pre-work might, if it's a financial goal, I might be kind of digging into like what that gap is, whether it's in revenue or whether it's in expense management. Um, it could be if it's comms related, it could be
Mm,
just pulling out like what outlets or what types, like are you not hitting your goals in LinkedIn, but you are in on your podcasting goals? Like what platforms, if you have a general social media or media goal, like what platforms are not working very well. So kind of just taking it one layer deeper so you can actually say, hey, we're having issues here. Here's the
mhm.
strategy I'm using. Does anyone else have any ideas that I'm missing here? Here's what I think might be going on.
Makes a lot of sense. And the curiosity angle is a theme I didn't expect of this conversation, but really
Well, because
loving it.
you don't want to be like, I find that it's so easy to use OKRs as like a compliance tool and for people to
Right.
perceive it as like a place of accountability in a brutal sense as opposed to like an opportunity to learn and grow and think differently about the work. And it
Mm,
really takes a leader who sees and uses them that way for it not to become like a focus just on compliance.
sure. One of the things, switching gears slightly, that was hard for me to wrap my mind around about your rules related to OKRs is
Yeah.
that you never change them mid-year. You knew what I was going to say before I said it.
Yeah.
And I think like this was the core. Jess and I, Helia's co-founder, have struggled with our OKRs at Helia, even though I am a self-proclaimed OKR lady and thought I knew how to do them. And I think the problem is that we were constantly shifting what we were focusing on. So that context, say more about why you never change mid-year.
Feel having done this now in multiple organizations at multiple different scales, everything from, a nonprofit I'm the board of where there's one full-time staff member to like, several thousand employees, is you have to accept that there is a level of imperfection.
Mm,
And I, and that like OKRs are a means to an end, they are not the end. And so if you accept that as kind of where it sits, seeking and kind of tweaking too much, you're spending too much time thinking about the object of the OKR itself and not the process, right? It's supposed to be supporting, which is a process of, again, learning, getting curious, actually, quite frankly, living with the tension of it not being perfect, right? Which actually might help you think more about what would be better. But
just
also,
to quickly jump in, I think I
yeah,
know where we went wrong because I'm a perfectionist. And I like why this is so hard for me is because I want them to be perfect. Interesting.
Yeah, and I totally feel that too, but there's the tension in it not being perfect and the conversations you get to have around it not being perfect are actually really important part of the process. Like, why is it not perfect? What would potentially be better? Why would that be better? How would that help us achieve our mission? like if you already have an answer or you're trying to fix it too quickly, you actually might be missing a whole opportunity to brainstorm with your team about
Mhm.
how to evolve. And if you're kind of a startup too, like that might also evolve very quickly. So you might come to a different conclusion 3 months later than you did 3 months before. And so if you iterate too frequently, like you're not able to then measure where you started, but also just segment that conversation and segment that evolution in a way that is respecting, I think, the process of allowing for imperfection and what it can tell you.
So let me give you a scenario just so that folks who are in this situation can see how you would handle this. Let's say it's July and you've got a metric that you've been tracking and an objective or key result, and it really feels your team really thinks it's irrelevant. Um, Maybe because an initiative shifted or something like that. When they come to you and say, Nicole, this doesn't feel relevant to track anymore, what do you do in that moment?
Yeah. One, acknowledge that that's true. Record it in some place that everyone can see that that comment was registered and that you're going to come back to it. Be clear about when you're going to kind of engage in that follow up. So I normally start kind of OKR revamping in like in October, November for an annual cycle. So be clear that you're going to come back to it, but then ask lots of questions like why? Like why is this no longer relevant? What is more relevant? Why? Track that. That's another really important one. Is a lot of times
Mm,
people are like, it'd be better if we track this. And then they're like, but I don't quite know how. And if we wanted to track that, I'd need to buy this new software, or like I would need to be better at like add the things on. And sometimes those things end up not being possible to track for a number of reasons. You don't have a budget for it, they don't actually have time to do it. So you can also then see like what's possible with that feedback. And so I would use it as an opportunity to have that conversation, and then I would hold it for a process that you already have planned and communicate that back to the staff members. So the one that they understand you heard them, you're having dialogue, but also you're not like throwing it away. Like you're taking that and you're going to use that to inform the next part of the conversation.
got it. So then let's say we get to the end of the year. I just want to hear your final, like how you wrap up a year of OKRs. I imagine there's some cheerleading based on what we've talked about, but how do you close things out and start a new cycle?
Yeah. So one, I like to have an all staff retreat at the beginning of Q4, end of Q3, where we get to just sing everyone's praises and like talk through what's going really well, and thank everyone, right, for like an incredible year of work. So that's part of it. Two is starting in around October-ish, I'll do individual meetings with OKR leaders. So each person who kind of leads an OKR and have a very structured conversation about like how it went. If there was insights that came up throughout the year, like this OKR no longer is relevant, work with them on digging deeper into that, thinking about what alternatives may look like, noting that I only change up to 20% of OKRs every year. Like I will not do a wholesale change of OKRs unless the organizational mission has materially changed.
Mhm.
We then take a spreadsheet essentially of all the existing OKRs, all the suggested new OKRs, and they're all color coded. And I do a few 90-minute work sessions with my whole senior team, where we go through, we dialogue, we cut, edit, paste, and we come up with our new OKRs for the year. And then that is communicated out throughout the organization, and most of the managers are also then having conversations with their teams about this as well. And then we roll. We January 1st we roll them out and we track.
There we go. Um, Very cool. I think the curiosity component, just to go back to what we were talking about before, I think is ultimately what really matters here. And that structure of making sure there's time um, to talk about the OKRs, that it's built into the calendar is critical. What we can say.
Yeah, it's interesting. I like cannot emphasize. This is probably why I remember when we were originally talking, you were expecting me also to be like more of a perfectionist too, like with the data. And I was like, no, the point is the conversation, like the point is the process. So much of what I see is not working is when I hear someone and they're like, oh, we have OKRs and we quickly update the data for like this one external partner. Like it could be a funder
Mm,
or for the board or for the CEO wants to look at them like at a certain clip. But there's no staff level process to like engage in that information. It's just the gathering of it for someone else. And you should be
mhm.
gathering for yourself first. That's like who it's for. And if you're not learning and using it to learn, it doesn't really have, I don't think it has its intended impact.
Yeah. If you're not learning, what's the point? I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. Nicole, I think that's a perfect place to end. Thank you so much for chatting with us about OKRs. And I'm sure we'll be having another conversation about curiosity very soon.
I love it.
All right. Talk to you later.
Thanks, Libby.